Hey, um, I was going to talk about the situation in Palmyra, Syria, um, but I don't think there's a great deal I can really say about that. I just feel that I do want to have a few words on it because I believe it is a very important issue. But what I'm going to do is amalgamate another story with this video, which is a lot more positive. Um, some sort of combining the positive and the negative here. I'll get the negative out of the way first. If you've been following developments in the Syrian civil war, you'll know that the so-called Islamic State, ISIL, Daesh, whatever you want to call them, have been advancing on the Syrian city of Palmyra. This city is a well-known site. I'm not sure if it's a UNESCO site, but it's very important historical site because it's has some of the best preserved um, remains from ancient Rome. I say has, maybe I have to say and that's tragic. Um, this reminds me of when the Taliban blew up the giant Buddhist statues in Afghanistan a few years back. Um, it's really heartbreaking to see thousands of years of history just vandalized so abruptly and so suddenly. And it's what can I say? What can anyone say to this except that Daesh is once again showing what a bunch of thugs they really are. Um, I mean, the logic here is destroying any pre-Islamic history, but it's tragic. Um, the last I heard was Palmyra is falling to their control, despite efforts by the Syrian army, I believe, is the main combatant against them there. I say that with some hesitation because the situation in Syria is such that it's very difficult to know who's fighting who at this stage. But it's just tragic to see what's going on, and this is one side effect of war that is often not really mentioned so much, but it's all I can say is it's going to be in their legacy. So anyone who tries to make a moral argument for Daesh, how can they justify something like this? Obviously, there's the human element, mass executions, and you know, women, sex slaves, and all the rest of it, and the appalling things that they've been doing everywhere from well, really from Nigeria. They're now aligned with Boko Haram. So let's say from Nigeria to Iraq, they have an influence, and it's very depressing that the speed and the strength this organization seems to have. Um, there was an article I came across earlier that a guy in New Zealand joined Daesh because he was lonely. Well, a lot of people get lonely, but not everyone joins a bloodthirsty Islamist organization whose agenda is basically akin to fascism. I mean, what they're doing is similar to what the Nazis done during the Second World War in terms of looting, and actually, arguably even worse because the Nazis were greedy. They took antiquities for their own use. Some of this stuff in Palmyra might be sold to the black market. I just hope that there's some sort of mechanism to, I don't know, to crack down on. Maybe I'm coming across as very naive here, but some sort of mechanism to trace anything that may be from Palmyra and arrest those who are involved in marketing it. I don't know. Um, but things for sure, it's not going to be the same as it was before. Unfortunately, there's no going back now. Probably right as I speak, they're hacking up the columns, and it's very on. It's depressing. Um, the closest I've seen to that in my own lifetime, or my like directly, is in some churches and abbeys in England. You can see physical damage from the time of the dissolution of the monasteries, which was during the 1530s. King Henry VIII broke from Rome. It was a major schism within the Catholic Church at that time, and Henry VIII was following the new church, which later started to become known as Protestantism. Um, And if you see some churches, you could see the signs of the vandalism from that time. That's why there's relatively few churches in Britain dating from before the 16th century, because a lot of them were destroyed in the dissolution of the monasteries. Not long ago, I saw something similar in Belgium. About a year ago, I was in Belgium with my father, and I believe it was in Ghent. Um, no, no, apologies, it wasn't in Belgium. It was in the Netherlands, in Utrecht. And there's a church there where you can see that a lot of the statues have the noses hacked off and so on. So again, I imagine that would have been from a religious schism. But you know how these people can destroy, because the thing about art and architecture, it's more than just the, you know, people shouldn't assume these are just all moldy or all crumbling ruins. It's a lot more than that. It is a symbol of history and culture, and to see what these people are doing to it is so disheartening. I mean, imagine whatever country you live in, imagine having one of your best known landmarks is hacked away. It's really devastating. Something similar happened in the Nepal earthquake recently. There was an ancient temple, I believe, destroyed. Of course, there's a difference with natural disasters, especially something like an earthquake is. You know, whilst that's tragic, to see heritage damaged in those sort of situations, in some ways, I think it's worse when it's man-made um, destruction, because I mean, you know, it's sad both ways, but it's worse when it's man-made. The fact that there's other people out there who can get so low that they would do that. I mean, I'm not saying this is the worst thing Islamic State have done. You know, cutting people's heads off is arguably worse. But if you've seen the film The Monuments Men, they make the point about the attack on art and architecture. You know, the American troops in that make the point of, they sort of question at one point why they're involved in a mission. And one of the younger soldiers is like, "Oh, it's just a bunch of art. Why are we risking our lives for this?" And the older man, who's played by George Clooney, makes the point, this is more than, I might be misquoting this, by the way, it might have been another character, but the point is that the character says we're doing this because art is an expression of people themselves. And if you destroy art, if you destroy architecture, if you destroy books, if you destroy all evidence that of a culture, of a community, that is, it's tantamount to a form of sort of genocide. I mean, I'm not saying Daesh is committing genocide against the Romans, because the Romans are an ancient civilization, they're long gone. But the point is, this is human history, and it's sickening to see what they're doing. Um, I can only hope that Islamic State is defeated, and there's no easy answers right now. But you know, it's difficult to see any answer to this. I could just hope that the forces on the ground, I don't care who it is, because well, I'm no fan of the Syrian regime, but I want to see anyone wiping these terrorists, these bloody, you know, I'm not even going to get into that sort of dialogue about what I think of them, because, you know, these are things that everyone, most people would echo. So I'm not even going to get into that. There's been similar examples in other times in history. In the case of Daesh, it's because of they're trying to eradicate pre-Islamic history. This happened in China during the Cultural Revolution. Obviously, there wasn't a religious aspect, but you know, you had situations where Red Guards would vandalize ancient temples and so on. It's one of the worst aspects of any sort of conflict or war, that a history is destroyed, because these are things that are not going to be replaced. 2,000 years of history eradicated in minutes with a hammer and a chisel. It's disgusting. Anyway, that's the negative side of that I wanted to mention. There isn't really much more I can say about that. However, the world is not all bad, and news is not all negative. So I came across a report which is an optimistic report, and it's something that is nice to read for once. The title is from the BBC, and the title is "Somalia Showing Signs of Peace and Progress." Somalia showing signs of peace and progress. Now, to me, this is very interesting. The video basically shows Somalis going into the sea on a beach, and basically this could be California or Queensland or anywhere else. It's sunny weather. People look like they're having a good time. They're swimming. Um, there is security guards at the side of the beach with guns, but on the whole, this does not look like this sort of stereotype of Somalia. I think it's fair to say that when you think Somalia, you think piracy, civil war, famine. It's fair to say that over the last 20 years, Somalia has been to hell and back. Um, so if this is a consistent thing, then it is definitely something to be welcomed. Um, I often find that people in war zones, people in countries that have experienced war for a very long time, are often very inspiring because they tend to have a toughness and a stoicism and a resilience that is hard for those of us who live in stable countries to really appreciate. So these sort of images could be anywhere, it could be a country that is at peace that you wouldn't realize has had 20 years of war and famine, and yet just normal everyday scenes, people enjoying themselves. There's a lifeguard, there's people taking photos, there's even a few cafes along the side. This is fantastic. I just hope it's consistent. I'm not sure, the report didn't really say how it managed to get to this level. I mean, I can't imagine Al Shabaab would allow this stuff. So I can only assume that Al Shabaab has been driven out of Mogadishu, and that's great. Um, again, you have a ruthless terrorist organization that is hell bent on bringing the country in question back to the dark ages, and here is a positive report. It's great. I just hope that it is consistent, and I hope that these um, signs of progress is more consistent. I mean, if you look at ongoing conflicts, and I'm going to make a video about that because it's something that I have a lot of interest in, and look at the fatality figures for the war in Somalia, it's still a dangerous place. There's still sporadic violence, but if you look at the fatality figures for this year, they are significantly less than 10 years ago. That in itself shows that there is signs of progress. I just hope it's consistent because it is going to take a long time to rebuild this country. And the danger, of course, of being complacent and assuming that it's just going to be an upward trend from now on. I'm sure there will be challenges, but I don't want to be a wet blanket for this. I just want to say that it's nice to see that for once because so often the news and a lot of the subjects, admittedly, that I talk about um, are downheartening and they're not exactly cheery subjects. This is a part of the world that for so long has had a negative image, and here this report is showing, and this isn't doctored, this isn't acted, this is really is Somalia. So I guess it might be also symbolic of moves by some young Somalians to try and portray their country in a better light. I've heard of, for example, Somalian art projects, Somalian um, green projects to sort of focus on Somalia's ecology. It's just a wide variety of things that are aimed at presenting the country in a more positive light. It could be that the country really is just war weary and it's tired itself out from all of this shit that it's been through over the years. So I really do hope this is a positive trend. I hope 10 years from now, Somalia will be a normal functioning country. I'm not going to be so naive and say I hope it's a stable multi-party democracy with no problems, but at the very least, I'd like to see it being a lot more stable. I'd like to see investment. I'd like to see economic growth. Um, I mean, maybe Somalia can learn from Ethiopia because under the Zenawi government in Ethiopia, the GDP did grow and there was clear improvements. Doesn't mean that the human rights situation is perfect, but very often in countries that are in absolute dire situations, and the first priority really is stability. Then there's other important areas like human rights, like democratization and so on that can be gradual. But for now, let's just say this is good news. I'll put a link to this one just below the video. And thank you for watching.